So excited that you're here for part 3 of a series that we're calling What's the Point? And it's all about trying to find your greater purpose. And sometimes you end up asking, like, what is the point of life questions because things are not going well, all right? You're in a place maybe right now where work is not going particularly well. We're going to drill down on that today. Or maybe your relationships are kind of falling apart, or financially things are not in a good place. And maybe you've asked the question, like, why am I even here? Like, what is the purpose of my life? And for some of you, the opposite is the case. Things are going extremely well. In fact, if you were honest, far better than you ever thought they were. You're doing much better at work. Your relationships are good and solid. Maybe your family life is great. You're in a fantastic house. You got more money in the bank than you ever thought possible. And yet, it's left you a little bit empty. And you're like, I thought it was going to be better than this, and I don't know why it's not better than this. And what is the point? I thought this was the point, and now I have it, and I don't know what to do with it. I graduated, I got into where I needed to get into, and I did what I thought I wanted to do, and I'm still kind of empty. So what is the point? And what we're doing over these 4 weekends, and we're in part 3 of a 4-part series, is we're trying to figure out how your gifts give you a clue as to why you are here on this planet and how you can find fulfillment and meaning. And so we started with this idea 2 weeks ago. I kicked off the series with this radical idea that you have a gift. Now, if you're a Christian, you're probably a little bit comfortable with that language. You believe that God gifted you with something. If you're not a Christian, that probably just sounds weird, and I get that. So if you're not a Christian, you might think of this through the lens of like, I have a skill or a talent or an ability or something that I happen to be good at, and Christians are just in the habit of calling them gifts. And we started with this idea that a lot of the frustration comes from this reality, that when your gift gets separated from the giver, there's a problem. In fact, we said it this way: gifts, what you're good at, that get separated from the giver, who I believe is God, end up frustrating more than they fulfill. And we heard a story from a guitarist you'd probably never heard of, I'd never heard of prior to part 1 of this series, named Caleb Quay, who over the last 3 or 4 decades has played with almost every major rock and roll star you could name. Mick Jagger, Eric Clapton. Eric Clapton told David Letterman he's one of the best guitarists on the planet today. That's a pretty high compliment in guitar world. He played with the Rolling Stones. He played with all kinds, Elton John. I mean, you name it, he's played with them. And he was backstage in a world of drugs and meaninglessness and pointlessness. And he started reflecting on the question, why do so many of these extraordinarily gifted people who have some of the greatest gifts in the world today when it comes to music, why are they bent on self-destruction? Why do so many of them lead disastrous personal lives, end up with drug addictions, alcohol addictions, sex addictions? Why do their lives seem to fall apart? And his conclusion after he became a Christian was simply this: that your gifts, apart from the giver, frustrate you more than they fulfill you. That you can't figure out what the point is because somehow it's a mess. And you could see it in the title package. In part 1, I brought out a Lego set. And what happens is life just seems random. If you just dump the Lego without the pattern in place, it's like random. I don't know why I have this piece or that piece, and you're trying to figure it out. So we're going to try to help you put that together over this journey in this sermon series, which wraps up next weekend. Last week, Jeff Brody, our lead pastor, walked us through this idea that God's fingerprints on your life point to your purpose. That all of us who are listening to this message at whatever campus you're at or watching online, we all are slightly different. And that the unique fingerprint of God on you is actually a clue to why he created you. Again, if you're just new to Christianity or you're exploring this, think about it this way, that your unique talent or ability is maybe a reflection, if there is a God, of God's fingerprint on your life. And that is a clue to your purpose. And so Jeff gave you the opportunity, I hope you took us up on it, to find out what your gifts are in this free assessment. So if you don't know what your gifts are, go to connexuschurch.com/what's the point. That's the name of this series. It'll take you to this page. All right, there's 2 free assessments, a personality assessment and a spiritual gifts assessment. The personality assessment is really a Myers-Briggs assessment. And some of you had them done at work, but this one's kind of fun, and I'll share my results in a little bit. But just real quick, I just want to ask, how many of you have already done the personality assessment and or the spiritual gifts assessment? Hands up. Okay, you did your homework. Maybe half of the people. If you haven't, it's free. And even if you're not sure about this Christianity thing, I would encourage you to do this because you're going to learn something about yourself, and you just might learn something about God. So To be a good sport, I did the assessments, and I want to share some of the results with you now, just to show you how this works out. So I did the Myers-Briggs assessment, and I turned out to be an ENTJ, which they call the commander personality profile, okay? So that's the name they give every one of the, I don't know how many personality profiles they are, but I'm the commander. Were there any other ENTJs in the room? One? Okay, we got one, two, okay, 3 or 4, we got 4 maybe in this room. This is what it says about people like us, okay? In this personality type, commanders are natural-born leaders. To me, that beats natural-born killers, if you saw that movie, but we're natural-born leaders. People with this personality type embody the gifts of charisma and confidence and project authority in a way that draws crowds together behind a common goal. Now, I would have to say that's accurate, not because I want it to be accurate, but when I look back over my life, that's always happened. It happened in high school, it happened in university, it happened when I was out of church world, like, working in the marketplace. It happened when I was in church world as a pastor. That's just my personality type, and I guess that's what commanders do. But that's not the end. Look at the next part. However, when you ever get a however, it's not a good thing. And when I read the rest of my personality profile, I felt like the teacher sent a note home to my parents. All right, this is not good, and I'm not particularly proud of what follows, but if you got born like I got born and got gifted the way I got gifted, this is what's true. However, people, commanders are also characterized by an often ruthless level of rationality, using their drive, determination, and sharp minds to achieve whatever end they've set for themselves. In other words, I'm a sociopath. Okay, if you wonder what that is, I get used for bad. This can be terrible. Look at this. Perhaps it is best, I'm quoting, that they make up only 3% of the population. This is what my personality profile says. Like, thank God they didn't make any more people like him. We'd have a horrible planet. It goes on, lest they overwhelm the more timid and sensitive personality types that make up much of the rest of the world. This is your pastor, okay? It's like, this is who I am. And if it wasn't, if you read on, it's not good. It's like, pray for the people who are in this person's family. Not quite, but it almost says that. It says it's almost impossible to be a child of somebody with this personality. So, and if it wasn't for my Christian faith, if it wasn't for Jesus at work in my life, blunting off some of the hard edges of my personality, it could be disastrous. Anyway, I promise you, your personality profile will be better than mine, okay? So that should be incentive enough just to take it. So that's your personality, that's your Myers-Briggs, but there's also your spiritual gifts. So I did the assessment, I've done this before, but I did it again just to, it's an all-skate. We want you all to do this, and it's free, and you'll get a card before you leave, and I put the URL on the screen. Please do this. We want you to do this, not for our sake, but for your sake, so that you know how God has wired you. So here are my results. Here's my top 5 spiritual gifts, and we'll list them in order. Number 1 is leadership. So out of score of a possible 100%, I got 96% on that. Teaching, 96%, which is a good thing, because that's what I'm doing right now. So apparently, that is one of my top giftings. Discernment, which is the ability to know what to do in a particular situation. Again, all 3 tied for top. Knowledge, 92%, which is kind of weird. I can discern more than I know. It should be the other way around, but I don't know. And then evangelism, sharing what I'm passionate about and sharing the Christian faith, 92%. Now, there's 18 possible spiritual gifts, so that also means you learn in the assessment what you are not good at. So I'm going to share with you my lowest spiritual gifts, and here they are in order. Prayer and healing. I almost failed, okay? 52%. Mercy, 40%. Service, 32%. So I don't like to help out much, but I don't care. All right, I don't care. It's like, I'm not helping you, I don't care, and I'm not going to pray for you. I am the opposite of a pastor. This is what freaks me out. If you think about what makes a great pastor, it's people who can pray and heal, and I almost fail. I barely get into heaven. Mercy, service. I'm a disaster. when you look at a pastoral profile, and yet I believe God called me into ministry. And so what do you make of all that? Well, as I thought about it, because it really did alarm me, like on a level, like, how did I get into this? And yet it's true. Everywhere I go, I end up in leadership. I'm the guy, like, if the room's disorganized, I'll organize it. If there's no leader, I'm just like, well, all right, somebody's got to do this. Like, that's me, and that's some of you. But you know what? And this is where, because here's the game you're going to play. You're going to look at your personality type. You're going to look at your gifting, and you're going to say, oh, I wish I had his, or I wish I had hers, or I wish I was more like theirs. Hey, what you need to know is that these are gifts. These are gifts. All right? So for some reason, when God was creating me, he's like, we'll just make him low in mercy and, a bad person so that he can basically be a leader and a commander, and he can accomplish things on the front end that other people won't be able to do. And he wired you the same way. Now, some people would say, well, you got to get better at this. And honestly, I pray about this. Like, I know apparently I'm not very good at prayer, but I pray every day. There's not a day where I don't pray. But right now I'm reading a book on how to pray better because, as I share with some of my pastor friends, it's an area, like my wife is an incredible prayer, and she's on the prayer team, and she seems to hear from God. And I'm like, I'm part of a church, and I don't hear from God. But anyway, I'm working on it. And I do hear from God. I shouldn't say that. But mercy, that can be a learned behavior. I can pretend to care, just so you know, just so you don't walk out of the lobby crying. I'm working on that. And service, that's a discipline. I can get better at that. But in my gift mix, God actually, and in your gift mix, God decided, no, I'm going to make you great at these and not so great at these. And that's okay. That's not the end of the world, because I want to accomplish something unique through you. And honestly, if these were my top gifts, we'd have a very different church, actually probably a much smaller church. And if evangelism wasn't near the top of the list and leadership and teaching, we'd have a very different church. But God used them to help reach other people. And I'm still responsible for being a good person, and my faith informs that. But this is what you're going to learn about yourself. So please, next week, by the time we wrap up with part 4, all of you do the assessment just for your sake. I just think you could learn so much about yourself and the way God has wired you. But what that will do is that will still cause some frustration. So back to work, your frustration probably is, that's very nice, Carrie, but you have a great job, okay? You started this church, you gave yourself a job, great. You have a great job. People tell me all the time as a pastor, you have a nice job, you only work 1 hour a week. I always correct them. No, I have to do 2 because we have like 2 services. It's 2 full hours. It's twice as hard as most pastors, But for the rest, you should see my golf swing. It's amazing, But you have a great job. You get to do, and actually, if you line up my top gifting, it lines up exactly with what I have done with my life. I've led things. I teach. I share the good news about Jesus with people. I help friends and leadership teams and leaders try to figure out, okay, which way to turn, which way to go. I mean, I get to use my gifting all the time, and frankly, I love what I get a chance to do. I always have. Does it have frustrating moments? Of course it does, but I love what I get a chance to do. And you're going to say, see, Carrie, that's not fair. It's not even fair that you preach this message because you have a great job, and this is what you're thinking, mine stinks. I have a bad job. I make minimum wage. I don't like what I do. I went to college. I got a degree. I can't find a career job. I've been through 3 jobs. They're all bad. I have bad coworkers. Like, I have a crappy job. So it's fine for you to talk about your gifting, and it's fine for you to talk about the church, and it's fine for you to talk about loving what you do, but my job stinks. And if that's you, you're not alone. We've covered this before in other series, and some of you know this. 70% of people are disengaged at work. And what that means is you live for the weekends. You hate when Monday rolls around. You hate it when you have to go back from holiday. You hate it. You're like, I don't like my job. And as a result, disengaged means you don't throw your heart behind it. You don't care enough because you're like, well, I got a bad job. Maybe if I had your job and I was gifted the way, your gift mix works and your personality, I would love my job, but I'm not in my dream job. I don't like my job. And 70%, think about that, the majority of you in this room, according to statistics, are disengaged at work. Now, that comes with a price. Because you know what it means? It means if that's you, you'll spend 90,000 hours of your life disengaged. Yeah, I know, that's depressing, isn't it? That is how much the average worker works before they retire, over 90,000 hours. So if you're like, I'm disengaged at work, I hate my job, I should have studied harder, I never got into the job I want, you should try doing my job. And that's why I worked for a year in law before I went into ministry. I wanted to earn a paycheck for a year, and I wanted to try to figure things out. And I've done other jobs in the marketplace, and you're like, well, if you have my job, you would be disengaged too. But if that's you, you're going to spend 90,000 hours of your life disengaged. And if you're a Christian, guess what? Your attitude will sabotage your gifting. Your attitude, you're like, I hate my job, I don't like my boss, I don't like my industry, I don't like this. That is going to sabotage your gifting because you will never bring your gifting into what you do. It means what you're saying to God is, okay, for 90,000 hours of this life you gave me, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to be disengaged. I'm going to work for the weekend. And some of you are like, well, that's great for you to preach it because you like your job and you like working at a church and, good for you. But Carrie, I would have a better attitude if, how about this? My boss wasn't such a jerk. You should come to work with me this week. My boss is a jerk. A real jerk. You look up jerk, picture of my boss, okay? That is the job I work at. And if you study management theory, a lot of people would agree with you. People don't quit jobs. People quit bosses. People quit managers. And maybe you have a jerk boss. Well, you know what? What if you have a bad boss for the next decade? What if you quit your job, you go to a new job, and you think you have a great boss and he gets transferred, and now you have a new boss and this boss is worse than your old boss? And so you're like, well, I'll have a better attitude if my boss wasn't such a jerk. Some of you say, I would have a better attitude if my job had a purpose to it. Like, I just need some purpose. Great. You have meaning to your work. You get to help people come into a relationship with Jesus. You get to help people create better lives for themselves. You get to help people. But my job is just meaningless. I just move boxes all day long. I dig ditches. You know what? I'm trying to make better profits every quarter for some soulless corporation where nobody cares about anything except extracting as much money as they possibly can from consumers. So you really think I'm going to find meaning in that? You really think padding the bottom line is going to create meaning? Like, you don't get it. I'd have a better attitude if my job had some purpose to it. I'd have a better attitude maybe if I had a better job. I did go to school. You know what? I did everything they told me to do. I jumped through every hoop. I've never found a career job. I'm underemployed. I'm frustrated. I'm making minimum wage. All right, I'm making minimum wage. If I wasn't making minimum wage, if I was making more money, if I was valued for what I did, if I had a better job, I'd have a better attitude. Some of you are like, okay, I've had a bunch of jobs. I don't like any of them. I'd have a better attitude if I had more time off. What about that 4-day work week, eh? What about quitting at 3:30 instead of 5:30? What about more time off? What about more vacation? What about living for the weekend? If I could just get some more time off and get away from work, then I'd have a better attitude. Well, if you want to live that way, you're just going to disengage for 90,000 hours of your life. And believe it or not, the scripture addresses that. And so this is actually for Christians. So if you consider yourself to be a follower of Jesus, Jesus has something to say for those of us who may not like our jobs. And every time I read this passage, it owns me. It schools me. It hits me right between the eyes. Because some days I don't have the best attitude. I've been in jobs outside of the church where I haven't liked it. And there are days, even in the church, where you get frustrated. Because you're a human being. Some of you created your own company and you're frustrated with it. You're like, I thought I could have done better than this. And so Paul is trying to address Christians, people who follow Jesus. And the heart of the Christian faith is not the moral teaching of Jesus. Some of you think, oh, Jesus is a great teacher, that's why I'm here. You know what? The heart of the Christian faith is not that. The heart of the Christian faith is this: Jesus died and rose again and opened up a way to God. That's it. Jesus died, Jesus rose again, opened up a way to God. That he is the way to God. God is not some universal being, some light force, some, whatever you construe God to be. God is revealed in Jesus Christ. And these people saw a guy die on a cross, or heard about a guy who died on a cross, and they went on the third day and the tomb was empty, and he appeared to people for 40 days, and he said, I am the way to the Father, and they arranged his life around them. And you become a Christian not by becoming a better person, because then we're all kind of done. You become a Christian by putting your faith in Jesus Christ as the way to the Father. And they had done this. But now, once they'd done that, once they were saved, once they became Christians, they had to figure out, well, what about the rest of this life? And some of them had terrible jobs. In fact, the first word will take you to a place that may surprise you. When Paul is saying, okay, what about our work? What about you got a couple decades left in this life until you spend eternity with Jesus. What about work in the meantime? So in a letter to the church in Colossia, he addresses the whole work situation with people who had it tough at work. Look at how it opens. First word, slaves. Slaves. So Paul lived in a world where slavery was common. Sadly, we still live in a world where slavery is common. Not as common as it was, but there are people in this world who were born into slavery, sold into slavery, sex slavery, human trafficking. And that was the case in the ancient world too, although it was very widespread. Sometimes you were born into slavery, sometimes you had debts and you got sold into slavery. And so you think about, okay, I got a bad job. I'm going to take a guess and just say, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that none of you are slaves. Is that fair? That you all get paid and you're like, I get minimum wage or I get below minimum because I work in restaurants and people don't tip well enough. Okay, I get it. But you're not slaves. See, a slave doesn't get to quit. A slave can't go from one master to another. You are stuck. And there were followers of Jesus who became Christians. They became Christians, but that didn't end their slavery. And Paul had to figure out how to instruct them. And what do you do if you're a slave and you follow Jesus? How does that work? And ultimately, Christians would work to abolish slavery, and we're still working to abolish slavery. But in the meantime, what do you do if you're a slave? Now, if you think you have a bad job, you don't have as bad a job as a slave. You get to quit it, and maybe it's not smart to quit it, but you get to. A slave doesn't have that freedom. You're going to go home to a house. Your boss is probably not going to hit you. And slaves in Greco-Roman culture in the first century, they were viewed as property. So if a master got really upset and he killed a slave, there was no repercussions at all. He didn't go to jail. It's like if you get really mad, you go into your garage, you take a sledgehammer and you smash apart your lawnmower. Nobody's going to put you in jail. You're stupid for doing it. You go out and buy a new lawnmower. That's what slavery was like in the first century. You kill a slave, you just go out tomorrow and buy a new one. People who were slaves were viewed as property, not as people. Now, the New Testament has a brand new ethic around that says, oh, no. Every human being is made in the image of God. Even slaves are made in the image of God. And we believe there's dignity in them. But in the meantime, the Greco-Roman world, the masters didn't see that. It was like, no, you're still a slave. You're still not going to get any money. I can still beat you. I can sexually abuse you. I can do whatever I want because you're my slave. So what does Paul have to say to slaves who arguably have it far worse than any of us who are listening to this message? As much as we may hate our jobs. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything you do. Now that's a tough teaching. Given what you know about their working conditions, why on earth would Paul do that? Are you condoning slavery? No, he's not. He just knows that even the fact that Jesus rose from the dead probably isn't going to abolish slavery and human economics overnight. The Romans are not lining up to convert quite yet. And these people are going to be slaves. So given the fact that you have a job you don't like, given the fact that you're in slavery, given the fact that you got a bad boss, given the fact that you're not making enough money, given the fact that you're not in a career job, given the fact that you're tired and you're exhausted and you're frustrated, what do? You obey your earthly masters in everything you do. And then he goes even further. He says, look at this. This is so radical. Try to please them all the time, not just when they're watching you. Come on, we've all been caught on that, right? You're in the office, you're on Instagram, and all of a sudden the boss comes and you're like, oh, it's email, right? You know, you're trying to please them. You don't want to get caught. You're on Facebook, instead of paying attention, it's like, change the screen. Try to please them all the time, not just when they're watching you. See how radically different this is? Look at this. He goes even further. Serve them sincerely. Sincerely. This isn't just an act. Serve them sincerely because of your reverent fear of the Lord, of Jesus. Now, fear has a double connotation in the ancient world. It means afraid, but it also means in awe of. You're in awe of Christ. You're in awe of Jesus, who is mercy, who is love, who turned things upside down. So because of that, serve them sincerely. Work, look at this, willingly. I know you don't even have a choice. You're a slave. But work willingly at whatever you do. At whatever you do. As though, and then he drops the bomb, as though you're working for the Lord rather than for people. You don't like your boss? Pretend Jesus is your boss, because he kind of is. And he says, so you change your attitude and you bring a whole new attitude into your job, slaves, because slavery probably isn't going away in the next 10 months or year or your lifetime. You may never get your dream job. You may be in a job where everybody else is disengaged. But if you follow Jesus, if you know Jesus, you throw your heart into it and remember that the Lord will give you, this is the promise, an inheritance as your reward. And that the master you are serving is Christ. Yes, you have a bad boss, but pretend you're serving Jesus. And what's this thing about reward? Reward? What do you mean? I'll tell you exactly what Paul means. Believe it or not, when you die and you go to heaven, work continues. Now, some of you are going to be atheists because I just said that. You're like, I don't want to work when I go. I thought that was like retirement forever. We just get to, go off sailing into the sunset and play endless rounds of golf and eat at the all-you-can-eat buffet. No. That's the version of heaven you made up. There's dignity in work. In fact, Henry Cloud says God is a worker and God is a lover. And if you think about it, you open up if you've never read your Bible, just get to the first page, Genesis 1. What is God doing? He's working. He's creating. He's creating. He creates the universe. What is that force behind the force that started all things? I believe it's God. I believe it's Jesus. He created it. He created you. He worked, and then he rested from his work. And some of you know that. I mean, for some of you, and Jeremy's going to talk about this next week in part 4, right? Your real satisfaction is it happens in the shop, in your garage, when you make a bench or you make something for your family. And you're a craftsman and you feel that satisfaction. Some of you, it is you do have your own thing and you got your dream job and you feel the satisfaction that comes from your work. For some of you, it's mowing your lawn, right? It's like, it was long, now it's cut, I feel good about it. For some of you, it's gardening. You feel that satisfaction. You know what that is? That's a reflection of what you were made to do. That work is good. It's been kind of ruined in this life, but it gets redeemed in the next. And based on how well, this is a whole other message, whole other series, based on how well you stewarded this life, you will be given responsibility in the next. So steward it well. And the pain's going to disappear. So you will get an inheritance as your reward, and the master you're serving is Christ. So even if you're a slave, change your attitude. But if you do what is wrong, you will be paid back for the wrong you have done, for God has no favorites. Radical teaching. Then look at the next part. This was even more radical. Masters, slave owners, be just and fair to your slaves. Now, nobody in Roman culture believed that. Slaves were your property. You could do whatever you want. You don't like your toaster, throw it in the garbage. You don't like your slave, kill him, get rid of him, sell him, trade him, whatever you want. Masters, if you follow Jesus, and for our sake, employers, leaders, Supervisors, listen up. Be fair and just to your slaves. Remember that you also have a master in heaven. You're not God, you have a God. And we've all worked for people who think they're God. And Paul's reminding them, you're not. I know the Roman law says you are, but you're not. You're under God. So for every boss, and this is convicting for those of us in leadership positions, you know what, as a Christian you should do? You should pay a living wage. Christians have a reputation for being cheap. That doesn't reflect the heart of Jesus. You should not be cheap. You should not be stingy. You should not be mean. You should reflect the heart of Christ in all you do and be just and fair to your employees. Be just and fair to your team. If you've been given a little bit of responsibility, use it, leverage it to make the lives of other people better because you are somebody who's under the authority of Christ. And that leaves us in this place. You know what? Bottom line for all of us, finding a better attitude beats finding a better job. And some of you have lived in a place where you're like, I'm going to get a better attitude when I get a better job. That's a terrible strategy. That because Jesus has changed you, if you're a Christian, because Jesus has changed you, you should be the person that throws your heart into everything you do, that throws your life into what you do, that throws your gifting into what you do, that says, okay, I may not have a great job, I may have a terrible job by all objective standards, maybe I'm undervalued, but I'm going to throw my heart into what I do. And I promise you, finding a better attitude beats finding a better job, and there's a payback for you. If you spend 90,000 hours of your life working, improving your attitude at work gives you a 90,000 hour payback. What other investment in your life pays off like that? Like a 90,000 hour, and you're like, I'm so frustrated. Well, just stop. That's your attitude. And here's what else is at stake. Your bad attitude will bury your God-given personality and gifts. Because if you're withdrawing, if you're like, well, I hate my job, I hate my industry, I hate this, I hate that. If that's you, or you just don't like it, or you're not giving it your all, you will never leverage why God has put you there. You will never leverage the best of what you have. And your God-given personality, your God-given gifts will never be fully developed because you just cut them out in 90,000 hours of your life. So this week, here's what I want you to do. And this is hard because 70% of the people you're with will never do this, according to stats. Improve your attitude. Improve your attitude. You know where I learned this as a kid? And I didn't learn it because he never said a word about it. I'm convinced he never said a word about it. But I learned this firsthand from my grandfather. My grandfather came from Holland in the 1950s as an immigrant to Canada, to southwestern Ontario, Windsor area. And one of the reasons he immigrated was because in Holland, he was supposed to have a farm. And the way it worked out, there was some family politics. He didn't get a farm. His brothers did, but he never did. So he thought, well, if I immigrate, maybe I can have a better life for my family, including my mother. And so he decided to come to Canada. And the promise of the government of Canada in the 1950s was that he would get a farm. So he came to Canada, and guess what? There was no farm. In fact, he never got a farm. When he got here, he got put into almost 1950s slavery in a labor camp on a farm that he didn't even come close to owning, making almost no money. And he was beaten and abused by the people who ran that farm. And my grandfather was a tough man. I mean, he was a man's man. And my mom remember him coming home in tears one day, and that was not like my grandfather because he was so abused at that job. I wasn't alive when he had that job, but by the time I came along, he was working in a greenhouse. And again, it was tough. You ever been in a greenhouse? I mean, 35 degrees, full humidity, 100 Fahrenheit plus, full humidity. My grandfather had the most menial job. It was absolute minimum wage, tough taskmaster. And I remember as a little kid, 3, 4, 5 years old, being out in the field with him outside the greenhouse, because he would take me to work. We lived really close to the greenhouse. He would take me to work. And I remember him literally shoveling manure into a wheelbarrow. And he never complained. In fact, he would whistle. I remember following him as a little kid, 6, 7 years old, and he'd be using a rototiller in a greenhouse, unbelievably hot. He'd be sweating profusely. Never complained. Threw his heart into it. My dad felt sorry for him, and my dad was in tool and mold and got a job at a shop, big enough shop, that he thought maybe he could get my grandfather out of that job and into a different one. So he got him a job actually as the janitor and the driver in this tool and mold shop in Windsor. And so my grandfather left the greenhouse and he went there, and he had the lowest job in the organization, literally cleaning toilets. But as I got a little bit older, I used to shadow my grandfather as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 15-year-old. He would get to drive the truck, and we'd go somewhere into Wisconsin or Detroit or whatever, around Ontario, delivering and picking up supplies. And then he would go in and clean the toilets, and he never complained. And every day when he was home, I would see him. He would open up, because we spent a lot of time at my grandparents' place. He would open up the Bible at breakfast. He would open up the Bible at lunch. He would open up the Bible at dinner. And he brought home his minimum wage to my grandmother. And he smiled while he did it. And I learned so much from my grandfather. When he retired, he was 68 years old. He had worked at the factory in Windsor for about 10 years. And they loved my grandfather. His name was Garrett, but they called him Gary, his Canadian name. And when he retired, he had only been there 10 years. They shut the whole plant down, brought everybody in, and threw him a great big dinner. They said, we'll never have another worker like Gary. And then they did something they only do for employees who have served there for 25 years. They gave him a gold watch. And everyone applauded, and his boss said, we've never had a worker like you, and we'll never have one in the future. Talk about a great attitude. He never got a farm. He got mistreated and abused. He was at the bottom of any organizational ladder you could come, and he taught me so much about how to throw your heart into what you do. So this week, improve your attitude. Improve your attitude. Christians should be the most positive people in the workforce. We shouldn't be stingy and grumpy and complaining like we are. We should, you know what? People who don't believe in Jesus should be lining up to hire Christians who bring the best attitude and the most productivity and throw their hearts behind all they do, whether you have a lousy job or not. And if you're not sure where your attitude is, let a friend or your spouse give you a reality check. All right, because you come home to them and you're like complaining about how bad it was, and you're grumpy and you don't like this, and you let them give you a reality check if you think it's all coming together. Now, next week, Jeremy McDonald's going to answer this question, because you're like, okay, I get that. I'm going to have a better attitude. Maybe one day I'll get a job that engages my gifting, like you got a job that engages your gifting, Carrie. But what if, he's going to deal with this, what if your job never fully engages your personality or gifting? I'll give you a hint. I'm not sure it can. I'm not sure it can. Even in your dream job, what if it never fully leverages that? We're going to wrap up with the series next week. Now, before we go today at our locations, I'm going to invite the band back up. And I want you to see something, because there is something about a person's gifting when it is fully engaged. A few months ago, it was my wife's birthday, and I got her tickets to John Mayer concert in Toronto at the ACC, the Air Canada Centre. And we've loved John Mayer for years. She loves his music. And so it was fun. We had floors, and I'd never seen him live before, although I knew all of his albums, all of his songs. And you know what amazed me that night? He's an unbelievable guitar player. But what really left an impression with me is how he threw himself into what he was doing. He was playing 10-year-old songs. I knew them to be 10 years old, like he wrote them that morning. Every single note on his guitar, every intonation on his amp, every little inflection of his vocal cords, he just threw himself into it. And I kept thinking that night, wow, there is something about an artist and their art. There's something about the gifts God gives us. And as far as I know, he doesn't follow Jesus, but that doesn't mean God didn't give him talent. There is something when we fully engage what God has given us that is just incredible. And so the band's going to come back. They're going to play one more song. And I've asked them just to, they do this all the time, but to throw their hearts into it. We are surrounded by incredibly gifted musicians at our church. And what I want you to do as preparation for going back into the workplace is I want you to throw your hearts into it as you stand and as you sing. It's a song we're getting to know here this summer at Connexus. I want you to throw your heart into it, because there is something about your heart, there's something about your gifts that they take flight when they're fully engaged. And in the meantime, this week, improve your attitude, because finding a better attitude is easier and beats finding a better job. So we're going to pray, Then we're going to sing. I want you to throw your heart into it. The band's going to throw their heart into it. Then we're going to go out and we're going to throw our hearts into what God has called us to do this week. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I just thank you for teaching like the one that we read in Colossians. It is amazing. And just forgive us for bringing terrible attitudes toward our work. And I have been a complainer at times, and God, would you just forgive me and help us to work like we're working for Jesus. And I just pray for everybody who has a job that they don't like, that you would help us throw our hearts into what we do as though we were working for you, because we are. And help us to be fully engaged, whether anybody's looking or nobody's looking. Help us to improve our attitudes, God, so that people tap us on the shoulder and say, what is different with you? Why do you live the way you live? What is with your attitude? And then we may get to tell them about Jesus. Will you help us with that? And will you give us strength that we don't have to do that? And God, I pray we would throw our hearts into whatever we're doing this week. And that we would improve our attitude through the strength and the mercy that you give us, and that our attitude will reflect that of Christ Jesus, our Lord. For we pray this together in his name. Amen.